Force and the understanding, appearance and the supersensible world. As we stated, Plato is the key to understanding Hegel's phenomenology, which can be viewed as a grand ascent out of the cave of the senses into the intelligible world of thought and reality and the absolute concept. In Hegel's introductory words of this chapter, quote, "In the dialectic of sense certainty, seeing and hearing have been lost to consciousness, and as perception, consciousness has arrived at thoughts, which it brings together for the first time in the unconditioned universal," end quote. The truth of perception is the unconditioned universal, that is, the pure, sense-free thought of the unity of the opposites being for self and being for another. Important is that this unity, which Hegel calls form, contains in itself as well the content of all the things in the sense-perceived world. That is, the form, the unconditioned universal, is the absolute and all that exists. Also, as stated, not only do we again start here with immediacy, but understanding still finds itself within the first section, A, consciousness of an object. This means that though understanding's object or truth, the result of perception, is in fact thought, the unconditioned universal, or the concept itself, it immediately takes its object to be something objective, a not I, and not subjective, an I or consciousness, which it is. It takes its object instead to be force and law. We have so far watched how the object of consciousness has changed from a sense this to a thing to an unconditioned universal. In this dialectic, we will watch how it changes from force to law to concept and consciousness, taking us into B, self-consciousness. Now, although in the truth of the unconditioned universal, form and content are now one, form being inclusive of content, because the understanding takes this result as objective, as not I, form and content separate, and we return to perception, whose content is the two moments of the medium of many properties or matters, and the one reflected into itself, which transition into each other. Hegel calls this force, which is a movement of unity, force proper or in itself, to diversity of properties, force as expressed, and back to unity, force unexpressed. This differs from perception, where there was no connection between the thing and its indifferent properties. Here, the properties or matters are produced by the force itself. The dialectic of understanding has three moments: that of force, of law, and what Hegel calls the inverted world. 1. The moment of force. Let's see how force negates itself and becomes law. First, a brief aside. Most commentators forget that we are starting here with understanding in its immediacy. Hence, it is not that force in itself is alone reality, whereas force expressed, the sense properties of this pen or table, is only appearance. Force expressed is equally reality. The truth is, as Hegel says, that force in itself and force expressed are inseparable, i.e. in concept. In fact, force in itself as a unity is not in the so-called supersensible world. It is in the thing we perceive. The appearance supersensible world distinction will only first emerge with law. Now, Hegel next distinguishes the concept of force and the reality of force. The concept of force just indicates that its two moments, force and its expression, are inseparable. But the reality of force only occurs when the two are given independent existence, which must happen because the truth is the unconditioned universal, the unity of being for self and being for another, or the unity of opposites. So, the opposites must also be real or independent. This means that in order for the independent, self-subsistent force in itself to express itself as a diversity of properties, it must be provoked or solicited to do so by a second force. However, the second force, being itself a force, can only act on or solicit the first force if it too is solicited to solicit, and by the first force itself. This can be made clearer by the analogous relation of cause and effect. A cause is only a cause if it has an effect. So, the effect can be regarded also as a cause, the cause of the cause being a cause, which makes the cause itself an effect of the cause. Both thereby exchange roles and functions, which is also true of the two forces and their soliciting and solicited aspects. The upshot is we have here a, quote, difference which is no difference, which Hegel will call infinity at the end, and takes us over into self-consciousness, which is likewise a difference which is no difference. It is this reciprocal movement of soliciting and being solicited which Hegel calls the play of forces, in which the forces vanish and yield an absolute flux, in which the sense manifold now switches from reality to appearance, at which point a supersensible realm of laws opens up and replaces force as the true reality and what is. 2. The moment of law. Thus, Hegel says, quote, what there is in this absolute flux is only difference as a universal difference, namely law. And law is the stable image of unstable appearance. Hence, the supersensible world is an inert realm of laws, end quote. We now have a syllogism whose extremes are the understanding and an inner realm of laws, and a middle connecting them, which is the sensuous world of appearance. However, the realm of laws, the new truth for understanding, has problems. One problem is that a law, such as the law of falling bodies, only accounts for some features of sensuous appearance, but not all. Quote, thus appearance retains for itself an aspect which is not in the inner world, end quote. To remedy this, we can multiply laws indefinitely, but positing many laws, says Hegel, contradicts the universal unity or unconditioned universality which the truth initially is supposed to have. And if we try to collapse the many laws into one law, then this one law becomes so general and superficial that it cannot account for anything in its specific detail. Another problem is the tautological nature of explanation, i.e., of a singular phenomenon using law and force. For example, we have a single occurrence of lightning, and then we generalize it into a universal law of electricity, having its ground in an electrical force, which is said to explain the occurrence of lightning. But the force and the law say the same thing. Quote, when the force is expressed, opposite electricities appear, positive and negative, end quote. Another example is, why does a stone raised above the ground fall when I release it from my hand, i.e., why is it attracted to the earth? Because there is a force of attraction in the earth which attracts the stone to it. Another famous one is, why does ingesting opium cause one to fall asleep? Because opium has a property or force within it that induces sleep. As Hegel says, these are explanations that explain nothing. But the real key here is that explanation is a difference which is no difference. And this is the same truth that comes to light in what Hegel calls the inverted world. 3. The moment of the inverted world. Hegel now says that it is the inverted world that completes appearance. Hegel now says that it is the, quote, inverted world that completes appearance, end quote. Since the inner world now contains a principle of change, which is able to explain change in appearance. The inverted world is the opposite of appearance and the first supersensible realm of laws. In the inverted world, the law is the opposite of the appearance. For example, what is white in the perceived world is really black in the inverted or second supersensible world. What is South Pole in the former is in truth North Pole in the latter. The upshot is that here we also have a, quote, difference which is no difference, end quote. That is to say, the law of the inverted world is, quote, what is self-same is really different, and vice versa. And this is an inner difference. As a result, the two worlds, appearance and the supersensible world, collapse into one. For the inverted supersensible world contains the world of appearance within itself. In simple language, the inverted world now has a principle of change. Quote, a thing is the opposite of itself, which is now able to account for all changes in the sensuous world of appearance, which the other inner realm of law was unable to do. For, quote, sense appearance retained an aspect which is not in the inner world, end quote. Hence, there is now no difference between the two worlds. They are exactly the same. Hence, we have, quote, a difference which is no difference, end quote. It is at this point that the object of consciousness is recognized to be self-consciousness, consciousness of consciousness, which is also a difference which is no difference, or an inner difference. As Hegel says on page 100-101, quote, each is the opposite of itself. Each has its other within it, and they are only one unity. This simple infinity, or the absolute concept, is self-identical, for the differences are tautological. They are differences that are none, end quote. He continues, quote, infinity, or the absolute unrest of pure self-movement, in which whatever is determined in one way or another, e.g. as being, is rather the opposite of this determination, nothing. This infinity, no doubt, has been from the start the soul of all that has gone before, end quote. And this is exactly how Hegel in the Science of Logic describes the true infinite, namely, as the relation of self and other, or the finite. Simply put, to the other, it is I who am other. Hence, self is other, and other is self. We thus have transcended the finite and have the infinite, or infinity, before us. We will also see this in life, which is a unity which becomes and is at once a diversity of members and systems. At this point, we leave consciousness behind and transition to self-consciousness, in which the object, the truth, or reality, is now consciousness itself. Again, self-consciousness is an example of a, quote, difference which is no difference, end quote. As an example of infinity and the concept, as Hegel says, quote, in self-consciousness, I distinguish myself from myself, and in doing so, I am directly aware that what is distinguished from myself is not different from me. I, the selfsame being, repel myself from myself, but what is posited as distinct from me, or as unlike me, is immediately not a distinction for me, end quote. This is the final result. Quote, the curtain of appearance hanging before the inner world is therefore drawn away, and we have self-consciousness, i.e., the inner being, the I, gazing into the inner world. The vision of the self-same being, which posits itself as an inner being containing different moments, but for which equally these different moments are immediately not different, end quote. We will take up B, self-consciousness, in our next lecture. Thank you.